In the past, playing backup quarterbacks has been a bit of a curse for the Seahawks. Will they be able to buck that trend with Mike Macdonald now on the sidelines and the Dolphins coming to town in week 3? We'll be taking a deep dive here on Crossover Thursday. Locked On Seahawks, Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12s and Dolphins fans. It's time for another Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks. Glad to be joined by Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins as we gear up for a matchup between former AFC foes here in week 3 at Lumen Field. Before we dive into this, Crossover Thursday is presented by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedInNFL and use the code all lowercase LockedInNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Here on Crossover Thursdays, we do each and every week. It's time to take a deep dive into both of the teams heading into our upcoming game, and the Seahawks and Dolphins gearing up for their game in week 3. Kyle, obviously the main storyline going into this game for either team when we're talking about Seahawks and Dolphins, unfortunately, another concussion for Tua Tagovailoa, and the Dolphins are going to have to play Skylar Thompson as their quarterback for the next 4 games minimum. What does this mean for Mike McDaniel's defense or offense going into this game, going up against the Seahawks, who have, for the most part, played pretty good defense here in the first couple of games of the Mike Macdonald era?
Yeah, I think for the Dolphins, this is going to really boil down to Mike McDaniel getting back to his roots, which was as a run game coordinator in San Francisco. They have had opportunities to run the ball in the first 2 weeks. Devon Achane's been a very explosive player, had a lot of volume against Buffalo. Raheem Mostert, we'll see if he's back this week, but even if he's not, Miami showed a little bit more diversification with some gap schemes between the tackles in the end of the week 1 game against Jacksonville. And what is Seattle willing to give you from a front structure perspective? And how does that impact what kind of runs that you can call? I think you probably look at the week 1 game plan that Miami had against Jacksonville, which had a defense that was very aggressive. They were kind of flying blind as far as what kind of game plan they were going to get for that game. So you saw a lot of perimeter screens. You saw a lot of quick throws. You saw as that game went on, they kind of built into some play action shots with second progressions down the field. You could maybe work to some of that kind of stuff, but I would expect this is a get the ball into your skill players' hands quickly type of game for the Dolphins. And it should be that because this is an offensive line that is built and constructed to fire off the ball and show run. And everything they do is built off of that. It's just some of the ball handling stuff's going to be compromised. I think some of the quick decision-making, throwing into the middle of the field is a little bit more limited. So you're probably going to be looking at more action on the perimeter, quick stuff. And if Seattle starts to creep up, hey, maybe that's where we kind of give you that look for a perimeter throw and we send one of our speed guys down the field and try to take advantage on a one-on-one shot down the field. But Mike McDaniel has to run the ball. And they've had success doing it. They had some penalties that prevented it from being an even bigger part of the success for them. But you can't call this game with all the nuances of the route stems based on defensive leverage and the timing of those throws into high traffic areas of the field. You can't ask Skylar Thompson to do that. And if you do, I think it's going to be a recipe for failure for the Dolphins offensively.
This is not going to be the first time that Mike McDaniel has gone against Mike Macdonald, at least from a offensive coordinator versus defensive coordinator perspective. And going into this game, it's interesting because Skylar Thompson's played a handful of snaps. He hasn't gotten to play against Mike Macdonald. Mike Macdonald hasn't had the opportunity to do that. And you mentioned how it's going to change the way that they throw the football and some of the limitations that they're going to have. But you're not going to be able to go into Seattle and just run the ball every single play. So from a passing game standpoint, especially with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, the weapons that the Dolphins have, how do the Dolphins maximize Skylar Thompson's skill set in Mike McDaniel's offense going up against this defense that, quite frankly, has been kind of vanilla schematically these first few weeks, and got to wonder how much they're going to open things up in week 3?
Yeah, I certainly think you can move the launch point for Skylar. He's a little bit more athletic than Tua Tagovailoa is, so I think that gives them an opportunity to do more play action with boots off of that and try to get your speed coming across the middle of the field and get some underneath completions. If you catch man coverage, you trust those guys to be able to run away from man coverage just because of how fast that they are. So rollouts, 3 levels, whether you're running a corner or some kind of a vertical with a deep cross and then somebody sliding through into the flat, trying to make Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill be the early progressions in those types of concepts to try to get them running away from defenders in space if they're going to do that. And if they're going to play zone, then you're probably looking at trying to get that second level in conflict. And that's where I think the interest and intent to run the ball is important, because if you can get Tyrell Dotson, I don't know what the status is of Jerome Baker. I didn't think he was a participant on Wednesday's practice, but we'll see what that looks like. But just that's whoever is on that second level for Seattle, if you can force them to suck up a little bit and take some of the touch throws out and just allow Skyler to see it and throw it, it's going to give you a chance to maybe get some chunk plays through the air. But I would be expecting a pretty conservative general game plan for this game, especially with it being Skyler's first start since the playoff game in 2022.
With that lack of experience, he's almost played as many snaps in the postseason as he has in the regular season in his NFL career. There's going to be a lot of the burden on the Miami Dolphins defense to try to keep this more of a lower scoring game, to be able to have a shot to go to Pacific Northwest and get the victory. When you look at Miami's defense and where they're at, they had a lot of turnover on that side of the ball. You mentioned Jerome Baker being a player they cut. The Seahawks signed. Changes up front. Christian Wilkins is gone. Moved on from Xavier Howard. Where's this defense at right now? And what's the biggest storyline on that side of the ball coming out of the first 2 games for the Dolphins as they get ready for this long road trip?
I think it's the linebackers getting on the same page with how to play off of each other. It was a bigger issue in week 1 than it was in week 2, but you saw it on the James Cook run for a 49-yard touchdown after the Dolphins turned it over on downs in the first half against Buffalo. David Long looks to jump outside, but there's a corner that's capable of fitting because there was just a nub tight end on that side. So you got 2 guys looking out there, and James Cook comes up through the A-gap and is untouched, and now it's one-on-one with the safety. The safety takes a bad angle. It's an explosive play. In week 1, they had Jacksonville backed up inside their own 5-yard line, and Jordan Brooks, name that a lot of Seattle fans are very familiar with, him and David Long are mugged up in the A-gaps, and David Long goes first and looks like he's going to cross the center's face. So Jordan Brooks says, okay, I'm going to let him go, and then I'm going to come in the other A-gap behind him. Well, David Long sees the center oversets, and then he peels back into the same A-gap that Jordan Brooks is in. Now you got 2 guys in one A-gap, and Tank Bigsby goes for 26 through the other A-gap. So that chemistry and overlap with run fits and understanding where your help is, where other gaps are accounted for, is the big thing. And with a big back like Zach Charbonnet, you don't want to let him get downhill with a lot of momentum. And I think that's the big thing for Miami is the second level needs to play their best game yet to make sure that they limit the explosive runs, because when they've gotten hit, they've gotten gouged. And I think the trend is positive, but you need more than 2 data points to definitively have a trend instead of just a couple of plots on the line.
When we come back here on Crossover Thursday, we're going to shift gears a little bit, talking about key storylines with the Seattle Seahawks and how it pertains to the Miami Dolphins going into this week 3 matchup at Lumen Field. Don't go away, 12s and Dolphins fans. Will be right back. This episode of Locked On Seahawks and Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Arena Club. For most of us that like collecting cards, the idea of spending $2,000 or more on a Patrick Mahomes rookie card just isn't in the cards. I love collecting, but that's some serious money to drop. Thanks to slab packs from arenaclub.com. Now it's possible to score gem mints for a fraction of their retail price. Every card that I listed was a hit from last week's Arena Club slab pack drop. Arena Club is the only repack that provides the real value, a complete view of all possible cards and clear hit rates for each one. Arena Club slab packs are revolutionizing the repack game with transparency. After your pulls are revealed, they'll immediately be placed in your showroom for safekeeping, selling, trading, or auction. The Arena Club grading process is accurate. It's fast. It's transparent with a full grade rationale provided, an explanation of how your card was scored. Whether you're buying, selling, trading, or displaying, Arena Club is the card collecting platform you have to check out. Right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL. That's arenaclub.com/LockedOnNFL, code LockedOnNFL for 10% off your purchase. Welcome back to Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks. Glad to be joined by Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins as we gear up for Seahawks-Dolphins Week 3 at Lumen Field, former AFC foes. A lot of classic games in the 80s and 90s between these two teams, and last played in 2020. That game was in Miami. This was a game, Kyle, that I was extremely fired up about when the schedule came out. And unfortunately, with Tagovailoa getting hurt last week, that's obviously put a little bit of a damper on this game. And yet at the same time, Miami still got tons of star power. And going into this game from Seattle's offensive perspective, it's interesting because I don't know that there are 5 quarterbacks in the league that are playing more efficient football than Geno Smith is playing right now for the Seahawks running Ryan Grubb's offense. And yet they have not scored more than 26 points in either one of their games. They've had some issues with inconsistency with their run game. Ken Walker III, we don't know if he's going to play this week, missed last week's game. Zach Charbonnet's averaging under 3 yards per carry this year, and it's not really his fault. The offensive line is still trying to mesh. You talked last segment about the linebackers and the chemistry. I mean, the offensive line for the Seahawks, a lot of these guys are first-time starters in Seattle, and they're all trying to get used to playing together. Connor Williams, the former Dolphin, he's been coming back from a torn ACL. He's had his moments where he's looked good. He's had some rough plays too, and he's trying to get used to playing next to not 2, but 3 different guards. They're rotating guys in at right guard. So when I look at this game, especially with Miami, the changes they've had in their interior defensive line, new linebackers that they've got, it feels like this is a game where they're going to have to get that between the tackles running going. So it's going to boil down to that interior offensive line. Can Connor Williams play more consistent this week? Are they going to be able to platoon Anthony Bradford and Christian Haynes and have success doing that? Because it's really tough to play platoons on the offensive line. But Mike Macdonald says that's probably the best bet for him right now. Can they get that run game established between the tackles, which they couldn't do against the New England Patriots on the road last week? It feels like a game if they can get their run game going a little bit and open things up for Geno Smith, take some of that pressure off him from Miami's pass rush, that would be the recipe for success. If they can't run the ball, being one-dimensional in this game against Miami's defense doesn't feel like that is going to be something that's going to be a good omen for this football team.
Yeah, so I think about the matchups too on the back end, and I think Miami probably likes some of the skill sets that they can have to match, but Seattle has a lot of talent at wide receiver that, you know, you want to force them to be one-dimensional so that you, from a rush perspective, can apply that pressure to help throw off that timing. Because whether it's DK or JSN, I mean, those guys both went off for big numbers last week. And then you obviously have Tyler Lockett in the picture, and then a tight end in Noah Fant who is athletic. And, you know, I think Miami probably likes Jordan Brooks' opportunities if he's to match up with him in some coverage stuff. But the front's going to dictate this a lot, I think. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that Seattle's ability to kind of find momentum in the early downs and not let Anthony Weaver, who is off this same coaching branch as Mike Macdonald is, a lot of the same things apply. Miami's had a very broad menu as far as presentation versus post-snap action, a lot of the same fire zones. You've gotten simulated pressures. You've gotten actual pressures that, I mean, they have not been afraid to blitz. They throw the kitchen sink at quarterbacks. And for Seattle to kind of get into third and mids and third and shorts really cuts down what Miami's able to present to you without giving Seattle overplay. So I think that's a great call out as far as the chemistry of that interior front for the Seattle Seahawks against Calais Campbell, Zach Sieler, Deshaun Hansman, the third guy in the rotation. It still feels like they're waiting to see who the fourth guy is going to be between Benito Jones as a nose tackle. But then Brandon Peely's also built like a nose tackle, but I think maybe gives you a little bit more even front capabilities if that's how the Dolphins choose to present their defensive fronts to Seattle.
You mentioned the similarities there with the defensive coaching coming from the same tree, both being from the Ravens coaching staff. I look at this game against Miami from a defensive perspective, and I mentioned this earlier. I actually went back and I watched the All-22 a third time, and I didn't see a single simulated pressure last week against the New England Patriots. I can't think of a time that I watched a Mike Macdonald coach defense that was under 5 sim pressures, and they had none in this game. There's no way, especially against a quarterback who has not played very many snaps. There is no way that I can see Mike Macdonald going into this game with that vanilla of a strategy. Now, on one hand, you're not going to completely open up your entire playbook going up against a backup quarterback probably, but at the same time, you want to give him looks that are going to confuse him. And I just look at the talent the Seahawks have, especially in the secondary. Devin Witherspoon, his blitzing ability, the ability to move him inside and out, how dominant he can be doing that. The linebackers, Tyrell Dodson is a really good blitzer. Tyrese Knight, their rookie that may be playing for Jerome Baker in this game, that is a strength in his game, is playing downhill, blitzing. Julian Love and Rayshon Jenkins can both do that. This feels like a game, and again, I don't think they're going to completely throw the kitchen sink over at Skylar Thompson, but this does feel like a game where, hey, this kid has not played that many regular season and postseason snaps in the NFL. It feels like a game that Mike Macdonald may want to open up the toolbox a little bit, just provide a little bit of a taste of what his defense can do from an exotic standpoint, and really maximize the players they have in the back secondary, the linebackers, and their ability to rush and mix in those sim pressures that they didn't really use last week and didn't do much against Bo Nix in week 1 either.
Yeah, I think you look at the difference with Miami and their offensive personnel versus those first 2 games is the skill player elements, right? Yeah. Where you maybe didn't throw the kitchen sink at Bo Nix, but you didn't have a lot of matchups that you felt like you needed to disrupt with what you could do on the back end. And I think the same can be said for New England. They have some youth there. Ramondre Stevenson's their best and most proven skill player, where Miami having Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, it's like, okay, let's shift some of the pressure back to the quarterback now instead of just being able to rely on our matchup. So I will be very interested knowing that that's how vanilla they chose to play the first couple of weeks. Is that from an install and integrity of what they're doing perspective? Is that we're only going to use the things that we feel we need to based on what our matchups are? So I think that's a really interesting kind of subpot for Seattle and what they have going defensively in this game.
And I also wonder, is this a talent on the defensive line issue too for Seattle? Because this is a really good front line. They may not feel like they need to mix in those pressures and those simulated looks as much as what they did in Baltimore with the group that the Ravens had. But Boye Mafe is banged up. Leonard Williams did not practice on Wednesday. I'm anticipating that Williams is going to play this week, but they've got a few injuries, a few bumps and bruises there. If they are missing one of those players, then that definitely changes things from a personnel standpoint. And I think we could see Mike Macdonald open some things up, maybe out of necessity more than what we've seen in the first 2 games. And again, those skill players for the Dolphins, I'm sorry, New England, you don't have anybody that can come close to playing at Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle's level. And even in the running back position, the juice that you're going to have from A-Chain, and if Raheem Mostert plays in this game, is a little bit different element. So Seattle's going to have to play things a little bit differently. Up next, we are going to shift gears to keys to victory. What's the most important things that both these teams have to accomplish to get a W at Lumen Field? And we'll have some game predictions. We'll get to that up next here on our crossover edition of Locked On Seahawks and Locked On Dolphins. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Bet on everything from DK Metcalf scoring 2 or more touchdowns against the Dolphins, or Tyreek Hill being the first player in Sunday's game with a 30-plus yard reception. Just throw in a $5 bet, and you'll get a 3-week free trial to NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to Crossover Thursday. I'm Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks. Glad to be teaming up with Kyle Krabs from Locked On Dolphins here for our Week 3 crossover. Both these teams have had playoff appearances in recent years. Seattle just missed last year. Miami made it the last 2 years. Little more murky situation with the quarterback Tagovailoa going down with a third concussion in the last couple of seasons. But nonetheless, the Dolphins still have a lot of star power on the offensive side of the football. Plenty of good players on defense as well. They're not going to be taking this game lightly, and they're going to be looking to get the upset. Kyle, looking at Miami's situation with Skylar Thompson being under center, some of the changes that they've had personnel-wise on defense as well. What do you think the Miami Dolphins have to accomplish in this game to be able to beat the Seahawks on the road after making that super long trip cross country?
So I'll stay away from low-hanging fruit like win the turnover battle with Skylar Thompson playing at quarterback, right? But I think the red zone has been a big issue for the Dolphins on both ends of the field throughout the first 2 games. Miami is 2 of 6 on offensive possessions in the red zone, converting for touchdowns, and they have allowed 4 touchdowns on 5 defensive trips into the red zone. That is not sustainable for any level of success, regardless of who's playing quarterback. So when things get tight and you have to make decisions faster, what are your answers in this game, especially in against a defense that are you going to see more simulated pressures where you think you're having space to access based on pressure, but guys are actually dropping out into those areas of the field and you have to make those snap decisions? How do you choose to navigate giving your offense answers and execute it at a level that's going to allow you to get the ball into the end zone? This is not a game that you can settle for 3 points a couple of times because, as you mentioned earlier in the crossover, Geno Smith's playing really high-level football right now, and they have weapons. This is a team that, if they have to and be aggressive, they're probably going to like their matchups. And the Ryan Grubb offense, they're spreading the field and forcing you to cover every inch of it, too. You know, there's a vertical element to this, but this is a pretty well-balanced based off of what I have seen passing attack as far as where they can attack you. So you need to be able to do your part. And then when Seattle gets down in there, your veteran players that you brought in, Jordan Brooks for his coverage in the middle of the field. Jalen Ramsey was better in week 2 than he was in week 1 after he didn't practice for a couple of weeks. Calais Campbell up front alongside Zach Sealer. Calais Campbell replacing Christian Wilkins. Jalen Phillips getting matchups. Your leaders on that side of the ball, you have to win that exchange with those possessions because Miami's probably going to play a little bit more of a possession-oriented game with trying to possess the ball, shorten the possessions for both sides, and hope that you can make the situational plays to win the game.
It's interesting because I think the Seahawks are going to try to play a little bit of possessional football in this game too, even with the quarterback situation for Miami. How do you limit Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and A-Chain and all those explosive weapons? You keep them off the field. And as I mentioned earlier, it feels like this is a game that the Seahawks, one of the things they have got to get going, that run game was weak last week in New England. They really struggled to get it going until late in the game. They got a couple of decent runs from Zach Charbonnet, but they got to be able to get the blocking up front so that Charbonnet can get rolling downhill. He is not quite as explosive as Ken Walker III. Mm-hmm. It takes him a little longer to get up to speed. Can they get that run game going? And if they are able to do that, I think that the matchups are there. Even Jalen Ramsey, I mean, DK Metcalf and Jalen Ramsey have had some epic matchups over the years when Ramsey was playing in LA. And the last couple of times that these two played against each other, Metcalf actually won that matchup. When you look at the numbers, he had a game-winning touchdown in one of those games against Ramsey as well. So Geno Smith is not going to be afraid to target Jalen Ramsey with DK Metcalf. But I look at the other matchups, Kendall Fuller going up against Tyler Lockett or Jackson Smith and Jigba, who can play inside and out. I like the other matchups there if Geno Smith has time to throw. It feels like getting your run game going, at least having a complementary run game is going to be able to take some of that pressure. Don't let Jalen Phillips and some of those guys be able to really pin their ears back. So I'm looking offensively at this game, the run game, particularly between the tackles where they struggled last week. Can he get it going against Miami's front seven? If they can do that, I think there's going to be a ripple effect. They've got some matchups they can take advantage of. And on defense, I think you do need to open up things a little bit as far as what kind of looks that you're going to be bringing in. And I'm even going to go as far as saying that this is a game where Seattle may takes a few more risks with the blitz because you're going up against an inexperienced quarterback. Even though he is more athletic than Tagovailoa, Thompson is a player that feels like, with that lack of experience, looking back at some of the preseason tape, if you can get some quick pressure on him, he can be forced into some bad decisions, even with some of the weapons they get on the outside. Make the young, inexperienced quarterback have to beat you in those situations. So mix in more blitzes, some sim pressures, maybe not open up the entire toolbox, but get some of those extra plays we haven't seen to this point and mix looks up a little bit, send some pressure from different levels of the defense, try to confuse the quarterback. I think if they can check off those boxes, the Seahawks have a really good chance to win this football game. As far as odds go going into this game, the Seahawks are a 4.5-point favorite right now. Kyle, you and I both are going to dish out our game predictions as far as scores on our Friday episodes, but with that 4.5 odds being a favorite for the Seahawks, how do you think the Dolphins handle this football game in terms of that? Are they going to be able to cover that, or is this going to be a game that, with the quarterback situations, could be difficult for them to be able to keep this game within 4.5 points?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is this was not an offense that traveled particularly well last year with your starting quarterback on the field. And some of that's based off the timing of the offense with the timing of the motions and everybody being able to communicate as far as what the calls are and when the ball snapped with the motion, or is it out of sync? So it could go both ways, right? Where that, in a very difficult place to play, rears its head, or maybe it's simpler because you have to have the backup quarterback in, so you can't do as much. And maybe it gives the offense a chance to do some more simple things. If I were a betting man, and I'm not, but if I were, I would probably like Seattle with the 4.5 points at home, just because I don't know how well this offense travels in general. And then there's the layer of the quarterback change on top of it.
Yeah, I think the Seahawks have a really good chance to cover that 4.5-point spread in this game. And both their wins have been close. They had a 6-point win against Denver, a 3-point win against the Patriots, a team that I was impressed with. They were much better than I thought they were going to be, a well-coached team. But this is an opportunity for the Seahawks to be able to get that offense humming a little bit. Can they take advantage of the quarterback injuries? It's a game that feels like it's set up. And again, I'm not taking the Dolphins lightly, but it does feel like a game, 4.5 points. I would take that if I was a betting man. And like you, I'm not, but I think the Seahawks at 4.5 points, I think that is a favorable one for them to be able to cover that in this game with the circumstances that we've got. But hoping that this is going to be still a really good game, and you got two really good coaches, so I anticipate that it's going to be competitive even with the injuries. A special thanks to the 12s and Dolphins fans out there as always for tuning in, and make sure that you're listening tomorrow on our Friday episodes, Locked On Seahawks, Locked On Dolphins. I'm Corbin Smith from Locked On Seahawks. He's Kyle Krabs from Locked On Dolphins. Again, make sure to check out both those episodes coming tomorrow as we draw closer to this Week 3 matchup at Lumen Field. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Go Hawks, go Dolphins.